Keep out of reach from young children. This is mental medicine not prescribed. Today we have sports psychologist, general teen anxiety psychologist, and former midfielder for the West Virginia Soccer Mountaineers. Nick Short, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how's it going?
It's been good. I kind of have one thing before we kind of start with the actual questions. Now, I read on West Virginia University Sports website that your head coach at the time, 2019, was quoted for saying, "At the end of the day, players win games and coaches lose them, and I didn't put the right team on the field and have the right play." So I kind of saw this as a double-sided quote. For one thing, kind of shows a sense of unity between the coach and the team. However, I also think it kind of shows some pressure on the coaches to kind of support their team. Do you think this way of thinking is the main reason why NCAA kind of reports that many sports coaches have mental health issues?
Oh, yeah, that's a very interesting question. So I'll backtrack for 1 second. So I do appreciate you introducing me as a sports psychologist, which is pretty equivalent to like the work I do. I am a therapist within sport, but I'm a licensed associate counselor, which is for the layperson pretty much very similar. But I just wanted to make sure that that's in the clear so some sports psychologists don't get mad at me. But yeah, I really like that question, especially since I actually coached in graduate school in the past 2 years, and so I got to see the pressure for myself. I think college sports is very unique in the sense that you get all these like really competitive games, like the most important games for your career, all within like the like 3 months of a season, and so I definitely saw during my time. I actually had three coaches as a player, two at West Virginia University, one at James Madison, before I transferred. And I saw, the different types of cracks players, coaches have. I think in that game, the performance wasn't where we wanted it to be, and I do think, like, like during that time, the coach definitely had some very clear challenges. I think the challenge is also with like rest and sleep, which we might get into, and like the importance of like the physical health and everything. Because during that time, I remember having video at 5 a.m. workouts going all throughout the time. So there's a lot of things in play, but definitely within like coaches and players, the mental health issues are very vast, and depending on how the season's going, it can really impact the player and coaches, as you'd imagine. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
kind of just add on to that. I kind of remember because I was on my JV tennis team for high school, right? And I kind of first match I lost it, and I was kind of disappointed in myself, kind of pretty angry. But you kind of need to have a way to look your in a way. And for me, I just not the best way of dealing with it. I just think, okay, there's next time. So just a quick thing to add on.
Yeah, yeah, and tennis is very. I worked with tennis players throughout my career, and individual sports have its own challenges. The level of support and the level of coaching is different between like players and ranking and stuff like that. And so yeah, you guys have the competitive aspect, but also the difference between how you treat teammates, because at one time they're your best friends and you're going to train with, but they're also people you're competing against in rank and stuff like that. And so yeah, definitely interesting. And if you want to bring some of your own insights and your own experience, that'd be awesome to talk about a little bit today.
Yeah, sure. Now to get into some, less in-depth questions, I guess. The first one is, when did you realize that you wanted to do psychology? Because I have a lot of friends who wanted to do psychology, and it's very useful sometimes, especially this age, because many people, increasing amounts of mental health issues as well as trying to have the responsibility and time to deal with them is kind of hard.
Yeah, yeah. And sorry if you just see my hand reaching over. My cat is trying to get into the screen, but I
No
might
problem.
just let him for a little bit. But yeah, I got into psychology. I would say I had a very early interest, and so as as you probably saw by some of my bios, soccer was like kind of the utmost important thing for me for a lot of my life. And I remember in high school, not a lot of initial care went into a lot of my coursework. So like math and science was like always a challenge for me, and kind of leaned into like reading and literature and stuff like that. But the only course that really like grabbed me was this psychology course. It was like an IB psychology. I don't know in Jersey if IB programs are big or if it's an AP type background, but I remember I had a counseling psychologist as my high school teacher, and that was like such a great experience. I learned so much, and I remember sitting in that class, and I was so interested, and then I Googled, and I was like, okay, if soccer doesn't work out, I think this psychology background is something I'm really interested in. Um, and I Googled it and it's like, oh, you need 12 years of school, a PhD. And I'm like, you know what? No, I'm not doing that. And so I kind of put that on a back burner and I didn't think I was capable of really going through grad school as a student and everything. Um, and I definitely had some other experiences within sports psychology that we might get into a little bit. One big one was I actually had experience where I was able to go to Germany and try with a different like professional clubs for their youth academy, and I had a sports psychologist with me at the time, and sports psychology is a little different. It's like sport focused, not really clinical, and so I kind of got to see like learn from my high school class like what like the cool stuff about like all these different types of psychology was, and then maybe like a year later I was like the only person that spoke English and I was like able to talk to and share some of my opinions and feelings with was a sports psychologist that was kind of there to like help out. And so that was really amazing experience. And then lastly, the thing that kind of sealed the deal was I was going through my own challenges at West Virginia University, at James Madison too. But I finally like reached out to the sports psychologist there, Dr. Dana. She's now with the Toronto Raptors. Absolutely amazing person. Yeah, she really showed me like how much perspective and different insights can really change like the way I interact with my own life and the relationships I had. And I think that paired with like my own interests, I was like, all right, this career is awesome. I'm going to try my best to make it as far as possible and see if I can make a living doing this.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to another question that I just thought up of right now. For my main audience, you're 18 to 24, going off to college. Yeah, I see the stats. Um, it's kind of hard going off to college, kind of separating from your parents and sort of dealing with isolation. I know of my dad's friend who kind of just dropped out of college due to that. It was very depressing for him to be by himself. Um, is there sort of anything you could, as advice to these people, um, that you could, probably help them with when they're first going to college?
Yeah. I think the biggest advice is like anything else, take these experiences um, and just notice them. So kind of what I do with a lot of my clients when I'm one on one with them is kind of get build up the skill of like mindfulness. And so when you get an experience, it's kind of like a math problem, right? You get a when you do a math problem, your teacher asks for all these different types of proofs, right? And so it'd be um, 1 plus 1 equals 2. Okay, how'd you get there, right? And then there's like this like little list of proofs. That's kind of how like you got to notice some experiences. So like if you're going to college or community college or even grad school and you're having doubts because you had maybe previous experiences where school was a challenge or maybe you have these things, just notice that like they're accurate, right? Like there there's definitely going to be challenges and your experience is your experience, and but also notice that there's like another reality out there, like there's another side, like not everything is black and white, and sometimes things are gray and sometimes things can go well and go poorly at the same time. And that's kind of the college experience. I don't think anyone looks back at their 4 years of college and say, "Oh, it was absolutely fantastic, no worries whatsoever." Right? It's a transition period that's going to be really challenging. And so I think the positive side of all this, so like the aspirational point is like you can do it, especially in the psychology world. A lot of people who are psychologists, counselors, social workers, there are people that are really good at like soft skills and maybe like not as quality as like other people in like the hard critical like science and math type skills. But once you get into the field, you're not really doing a lot of that, right? Like you got to take in evidence and research and be able to read and stuff like that to like give the best care possible. but those soft skills are really going to carry you far. And if you feel like you have those or can like create those like as you grow up, you're going to do really successfully in this career. And I can't really speak for other careers, but that's how I'd interpret it as well. It's like if you can feel motivated and challenged, and you can take these experiences that you have in the past and use them for the future, I think you can do a lot of great things, right? Like no matter what you're looking at, and counseling's no different.
Yeah, and just for a bit more about myself, I'm trying to get a dual degree in business and engineering. I kind of was
Hmm.
going to engineering at first because I thought, the people there were going to be fun, and also it's also a lot of different things to build. I like working with my hands, so that was the original thing. But then I thought, going to college, I saw a lot of people going to do engineering things, technical things. They were more, likely to get isolated or sort of not socially out there. So I was like, well, what's the total opposite? There's business, which kind of needed to have connections, right? So, anyways, that's just a bit about myself on like business and stuff, and just trying to navigate through which one would kind of balance out the other. Um, and I'm not the most athletic, so that's not the best thing. I'd say my circulation is pretty bad. But I do occasional running and walking. But for more athletes in sports, is there anything specific with athletics or sports that you notice helps the most with athletes? Something that most athletes do that kind of help them out more compared to the normal average person doesn't do as much.
Yeah, yeah. I would say what I've noticed, like when I first got into this field, you kind of get trained in a way. So my master's degree was dual in like sports psychology specific stuff and clinical mental health counseling, and they came from two separate programs. So you kind of hear one thing from the sports group and another thing from the clinical mental health counseling group, and a lot of it connects, like the way you do the work, all like it all connects. But you kind of hear like, oh, athletes specifically do this, and then non-athletes do this. But what I've learned, like the more I'm like in the field, is that a lot of people, athlete or not athlete, can benefit from the same exact things, and everyone's different as well. So even if two soccer players come in for me, the odds that I can just do the same work with both of them are very low, right? Like they're going to take different challenges. But I will say, like athletes, and specifically a lot of men and young men, they look for like action items, right? And so that's probably the big difference. Like some clients come in and I can just talk and we can reflect and gain insights, and that's awesome. And that's kind of like the bulk of the counseling work. But when I work with a lot of athletes or really high like left brain, so I'm thinking um high performing like doctors, lawyers, stuff like that. They all look for like action items, like, oh, it was great we talked about this, but what am I gonna do? Like, give me something to do, right? And that's part of like a big challenge because one, I could come up with something, like I could come up with some homework and stuff, but that's also leaning into how they work into like a lot of different spaces. So it's kind of like balancing the act of like, okay, how do I give this person things to do, like activities, and but also like really give the bulk of the credit to like this idea of like reflection and like figuring it out and like understanding yourself, right? And so I would say, like in the career that you're looking into, like you mentioned, engineering and business, I work with a good amount of engineers, and all of them are the same, right? They all want action items. They're like, talking about it is fine, but I want to do something about it, right? And so that's kind of the barrier with counseling, but also I really enjoy kind of like playing with like ideas of like, oh, what do you mean by that? Like, what is like an action or like a homework or something that like kind of scratches this like side of you, but also like, really investigates a new part of yourself.
Yeah, and speaking of sort of doing things, like that's kind of what I notice right now actually about my own self when I'm like, I went to a psychologist, I have like a therapist for anxiety and stuff. And afterwards, I'm kind of like, this was kind of pointless. I'll just deal with it myself somehow. So I kind
Mhm.
of, for my own advice for people who want to do like something assignment to do, right? My sort of way of doing things is I identify things I'm bad at or fears that I have that cause anxiety. I kind of look into myself a lot more. I'm just writing down this stuff on a journal or something, and I'm like identifying like which do I want to kind of tackle first, right? Which sort of obstacle do I hate the most? Like the weirdest one was dealing with my fear of dead animals on the road, roadkill, basically.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, what's the root of this? And the thing is, it's a funny story. I was walking down back from school one day. I stepped on a dead squirrel, and that's how I developed the fear of dead animals. And I guess what helped me through that one was just walking more on the road, kind of observing, these animals and trying to see like what's the harm in this that's gonna sort of make me more scared, right? So the thing that kind of helped me more was it was sort of sixth grade, and I finally decided to just get rid of it once and for all. Kind of like we were selling the house. There's a dead rat in front of my house. I was like, I'm gonna bury that rat, and I'm going to not be afraid of the rat anymore. So that's how I kind of dealing with it, kind of symbolically as well as just putting it away, right? So uh, that's kind of my way of just getting rid of any sort of fears and just trying to deal with anxiety in a more active way.
Yeah, yeah. So you're kind of speaking to kind of like
Yeah.
that having that action item. And I think that the action item that I like the style of counseling I do, um, which is EMDR, like eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a mouthful, but it kind of focuses on like the physical symptoms, right? So in your situation, it'd be like, okay, when you have when you see a dead animal or like what does your body feel like, what signs show up for you, and so that's usually like my action items for people. It's like, all right, you're tasked with like finding what your body feels like, understanding like some of your physical reactions, and then if you make it pretty simple and like analyze your body from a sense of like a stoplight, so like green, yellow, red, right? It's really basic. We can all kind of think about those ideas, and green being like the best feeling, yellow being like that challenge state, so like um you're not really like dysregulating, but you are like your fight or flight symptoms are kind of like coming in, you're feeling a little jittery, right? And then there's like that red state, which is like either complete shutdown or like you really want to flee or fight or something like that. um and so like just getting used to like understanding like what your body feels like in those moments, and once you figure that out, it's kind of easy. You don't even have to connect to like the thought, right? You can just be like, okay, I feel like this. I'm going to do a action that relaxes me because I'm in the yellow state, right? Or I'm going to get social connection. I'm going to be with my friends or something like that. So action is kind of like tied to it, right? But a lot of like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, is like very thought. It's like, okay, the thought comes first, the thought comes first. And so, and there's some other types of counseling that really engages like, okay, there's other things involved in the system.
Yeah. A lot of teens also sort of trying to figure out what to do with their life as well. Like, what's the next step right afterwards, which is currently what a lot of people after their last year in college or during their final year in high school, kind of thinking back, being like, what's next? What do I do next? And, I feel like that's a contributing part of mental health problems, not
Mm-hmm.
knowing what's next, the uncertainty of it. It's kind of thrilling for some, but for others, it's kind of detrimental to their own health. What other factors do you think are contributing to mental health for teens and stuff?
Yeah, yeah. So what's next? What's in the past, right? So if we kind of follow along that, where like really hard experiences, trauma, or um, even like challenges that are just really good. If we go back to what I said before, like there's like proof and evidence, like anything that's like really good proof or evidence to do something one way only, that's usually a sign of like, okay, maybe we can like investigate and learn more from this experience. But I would say like a lot of high pressure. The biggest thing I see, like for my work, is the the news, the phone, all these things that come up. Because, like, if you think about it, and it's a lot of firsthand experience, I hear that like kids are growing up at like 10, 12. People are getting phones a lot earlier, and if they don't have a phone, they have an iPad, access to computer. Your schools are giving you computers at this point, right? And so like you log on and you see all this like really like dysregulating stuff, like this really like hard things to see. So this like all these wars, protests, um, things that are really important in this world, but like other generations might not have seen that until they were adults, or maybe they take a college class and they're like, oh, this is really happening. And so I do think the information out there is like really helpful in the sense of like having like a sense of like the world and like understanding what's going on in it. But I don't think there's a lot of like support out there for people to like really check in and be like, okay, this is going on in your world, but like what's going on in your exact world, like your day-to-day life, right? And so if you bring in these like fears and these new anxieties that are coming from like literally overseas, right? Or like from other places that you actually don't have any connection or affiliation with, that's for the most part empathy, right? So a lot of people with empathy kind of like feel that way. But at the same time, we got to learn how to like, okay, how do we contain some of this anxiety? How do we use it to either do better and do good? But also like we got to think about like the high schoolers and the kids and the people who, this is a very new experience for a lot of people. And I guess I got on a little tangent about this part and like this idea of like media and stuff like that. But it is like a really common reality I see in a lot of my work, and especially with athletes, considering like some people are actually tweeting at them and some people are actually like calling them out on their performances and stuff like that. And so I would say that's probably like a great factor that people tend to think about, but like doesn't give a lot of credit to like how actually challenging it is.
Yeah, and I also say like there's an increasing amount of people who are thinking like in a monochromatic way, just black and white and no gray area. So like there's the news, like you said, on social media. There's always just bad things happening or over dramatized sort of. There's a few things about like, for example, just the economy sometimes, or the government, or just a bunch of, you know, very big adult things that just kids kind of just use their own brains to sort of just put themselves in that situation. And I kind of noticed at my school with people just getting more negativity from this instead of just trying to think positively about their own life. And now they're thinking about, okay, if I'm going to this world that is so dangerous, how am I going to live? How am I going to survive? That's sort of the sort of suspense that people develop. And I kind of, just a quick thing with like, I feel like this is kind of feeding into evolution as well in a way that they want to find something to fear because, in many things like anxiety or other mental health problems also stem from the same regions where feelings of, you know, defense against, dangers are kind of processed. So, do you think civilization has gotten to the point where this kind of inactivity with not being able to find something to fear is just trying to fill a void of defense and fear for something? Or, just kind of long. I'll just put it in short. I'll say, is anxiety and mental illness a step forward in evolution or just a pesky obstacle in the case we need to get back to our roots?
Yeah, yeah. I would say my perspective is like I think you're hitting it like pretty close to how I think of it. But if I put it like really simple, I think in the past, like if we go back to like caveman days, the anxiety and the depression and the grieving and everything was, I imagine it to be, obviously I'm not a caveman, but um, I would imagine it to be pretty straightforward, right? It's like I'm anxious that a lion's gonna, capture and kill me, right? And then you have anxiety all day, and people are like, "No, duh, like we live around lions, right?" And same thing, like if one of your buddies, passes away due to like a minor cut, there's grieving involved, there's sadness, or, some of that still happens in like a lot of the world. So that's probably an example that's not just stuck in the past, but in the same way, it's like it's a lot more clear and people are a lot more accepting, and like that's like a reality, right? But if you go to high school, for example, and there's a kid that's like, I'm really anxious all the time about my test in 3 months. A lot of people are adults who are either like annoyed with it because they don't want to deal with like the symptoms, or they think that these students might be like just overreacting, right? But if you think of it in the same example, a lot of the media out there is kind of saying like, okay, it is life or death if you fail high school. It is life or death if you get a B on this test, right? And so it's this idea of like bringing in these newer anxieties which aren't, your body's taking similar reactions to like how we were in the past because we're the same people, we have evolved, but we got to keep those skills in our locker, right? Like you want to be able to run from a bear, right? Like if you get stuck in a situation, and even if like your life is risked, very like physically in like in the future, you want to have those skills to like really have your body like jolted up and ready to go. But in our society nowadays, it's not super helpful to have those reactions like in a workplace or in high school. Um, and so like I think a lot of people when they come and talk to me, they're like, let's cut this out. Like I want no anxiety. I want to be like the most chill person in the world. I think the common term is like nonchalant. Every high schooler wants to be like this mysterious nonchalant person, right? But the reality is like you can't stop the reaction from happening, right? You can put yourself in better situations, but the reality is it's like we can contain it, right? We can, when it comes in, it's like, how do I notice this is coming? How do I accept it? And how do I move forward, right? This world where it's like, I don't have anxiety. You don't want that because then you won't be able to, use it when it's useful.
Yeah, and I kind of that brings me back to a thought I had. I was like, I want to be stoic. I want to be able to deal with insults and stuff, right? Because I found that a lot of those great leaders and stuff, they're like, oh wow, there's this news about myself in a mugshot or something. I don't care about that. That's sort of thing people notice on the news as well. And I was like, well, I want to be stoic. I want to be this great person who just doesn't feel feelings. And then I kind of thought back at like, what's the fun in that? What's the fun in having no feelings about people insulting? It's kind of just, you know, a way of just desensitizing yourself, which is kind of more negative if you think about it, because now you're not able to feel the other feelings that you want, and now you're kind of getting numb to the world, which is just, I think, a bummer if you kind of think of the sort of sides. And I kind of notice, there's a lot of misconceptions about mental health as well from my previous podcast and stuff, and from just thinking about myself and people around me. People know these misconceptions already now, but there's a few that are still out there. But first, I want to talk about the ones that people have gotten right. Which things do you think um, society has gotten right in terms of mental health, and which do you think could be worked on more?
Yeah, I'll first off say like I think I really like the idea of stoicism, right? Like I like that better than nonchalant. And I think you're on the right path of like thinking of like that might be a reaction, right? So people who are very stoic are probably like really good at containing themselves, right? More than they're not feeling anxiety. Um, but at the same time, I think the importance is like now, right? Like, how do we make right now the best possible? And I think that's like a really new thought for a lot of people of like, oh, no, but I have this future that's coming up, like college, right? I have college coming up. I have to be prepared for it. It's like, okay, but are you prepared for right now? Like, are you prepared for this moment? Like, are you ready to go? Do you feel comfortable, right? And so that's kind of like a lot of what I work on with people. And I think to like follow up on your actual question, right? And like what people have gotten right in mental health. I think like it's such a paradox, like the buzzwords that are out there in mental health, right? There's a lot of like terms like probably common ones are manipulating, narcissism, gaslighting, all those type of things. But I actually feel like a great pleasure in the idea that there's like just more like thought about it, right? People are going into these experiences and thinking, oh, wait, I failed, right? I failed this experience, whatever it is, if it's a relationship or school or something like that. But there is a reality where this might not be my fault. Or like there might be more factors into this than just me failing. And I think that's where a lot of like society have gotten right in the sense of like, okay, it's not just black and white. And if you talk to like your grandparents or like anyone who's kind of like not in that Gen Z millennial generation, it's very hard for them to think in a way that's not black and white because it's scary, right? To have this reality of like, okay, there's like all these different options and some of them blend into me, some of them have nothing to do with me, right? And so, and I think a lot of young people understand that. I think it's a hard reality in the sense of like it's a lot easier when things are black and white because you have two options, right? Now there's like a million different ways to deal with things. Um, And I also like I give a lot of credit to New Jersey in itself. I don't think a lot of other schools are like this or like school districts, but at least in the Bergen County School District, where people have definitely gotten it right is like all those like there's like a lot of wellness spaces. I talk to counselors for my clients like within the schools, and like there's a lot more care for mental health. And I imagine talking to a lot of professionals like different careers, if I bring up mental health from my perspective, like from like an educated, like research backed perspective, a lot of people like listen to me, right? Where in the past it might just be like, all right, this hippie like actually wants people to feel good, you know? And so I think I kind of went all over the place a little bit, but I think those two like kind of themes are definitely where I think society has gotten a lot stronger, and there's still like a good bit to go, but the the stigma has definitely changed, like massively changed. I think I'll give like one more example of how I see this. Like I'm a big movie person, so I love watching movies, and in this area, there's so many different theaters, and I saw like these four kids, all like boys, and they like cut like skipped out on the line and just like chased themselves into like movie theaters and like didn't buy for tickets and stuff like that. Like there's average like those kids who are just like don't care, you know, and they're just trying to have fun. And they eventually got caught, and I saw them walking out. And as they're like walking out and they're like in trouble, they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go tell like my therapist about this," and like they're like openly talking about like their mental health. You know what I mean? Like obviously, those are probably not the best example of like prime citizens, but I really thought it was like so interesting that this population that when I grew up with, like these kind of like really carefree people who are like there just to do fun stuff, they definitely weren't talking about mental health and definitely not talking about their therapist to each other when I was growing up. And so just to see like that openness was really eye opening for me. And I really hope it keeps going in that direction.
Yeah, and sort of living life is sort of, I think, the goal for many people for just trying to get more positivity in your life, right? So, like going to the beach with your family, perhaps, or just making trouble, like you said. I kind of noticed like same thing in like movies and stuff. I'll go to a movie and there's a few kids who are from my school that go to the same movie theater, and I notice they're more carefree. You know, they're more sort of they're shouting in the movie theater. They're like, "Oh, look at that guy! He looks this way or something, or he did that," and it's funny and stuff. So, um, I feel like being carefree and living your life is generally a great way to sort of uh, get your way, get yourself away, practice very good sort of mental health, sort of, and just trying to be more positive. Which leads me to my final question: um, How has your life been? What do you think of currently?
Wow, what a big question. How's my life been? Um, I'll say honestly, it has been pretty great. So I definitely had my own mental health challenges, and had family members with mental health challenges and stuff like that. And I think the more I've grown and the more I've like gotten into the field and seen therapists myself and stuff like that, I've definitely learned to be present more. And a lot of my focus has been like in the past, especially like bringing it back to sport and everything, like in soccer, my goal was always like in this future, right? Like, oh, imagine if I was like a professional in England and doing all this cool stuff. And that was like a great, you know, thought and a great dream and really got me far. But at the same time, like looking back at my past, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of experiences that I had that were absolutely amazing. That I look back now, I'm just like, holy, like I did that, right? But I wasn't really there to live that moment. I was like, that was like a net another component into my future, right? And so I think now I've kind of like brought into my life, like, okay, how do I make every moment as like special, or even if it's not a special moment, like how do I like live it as good as possible, and how do I bounce back from this world of like past, like how do I use my past as like evidence and really strong like opinions and stuff, like how do I use this information and also use my goals in the future and just move back and forth and eventually end up in the middle in that present moment as much as possible, right? And so that has really been my goal. and I'm lucky to have like a fantastic fiance. She brought me to this great state of New Jersey, um, and I'll tell you, New Jersey food that brings up my mental health more than anything else, right? So sometimes I see my clients like really late at night. I have an option for like best bagels, best pizza, that like I'm like internally grateful for this area, and I grew up in Virginia, in Clifton, Virginia, and there was like a big like Korean population, right? And I grew up eating a lot of like Korean food, and that was kind of like my go-to for like a lot of meals and stuff. And when I moved here, I was like, all right, that's probably the only thing I'm gonna miss out in Virginia, but it's just a massive Korean population around here, and like the food is just insane there too. So um, enjoy. I would say like my advice to others is like enjoy what you have access to, and that's what I have access to, and I think it's fantastic. But yeah, I kind of dodged your question because it's a hard one, but I will say my life has been pretty great. Yeah.
Well, I'll answer my own question then. Well, my life currently has been pretty good. I just came back from um, a few months of counseling from a therapist and stuff, dealing with anxiety and sort of just talking through it. And although in retrospect didn't really help out too much with like trying to think in terms of positivity, it did help me think about myself in a different way, right? It did make me memorize sort of past moments that where I'm kind of more positive, living life better. Just with my family is the main thing. Um, and living the present, I kind of agree with that a lot. That's the thing that my mom kind of mentions. I'm like a 17-year-old who runs a podcast, a club, and a business, which is kind of very not the norm for people my age. And my first phone was a Nokia sort of flip phone, so that's kind of also out the norm.
Yeah,
Um,
those are awesome.
Otherwise, my life has been great. I just had my birthday yesterday, which actually wasn't as great because, well, the food was just, let me just say, kind of to put a bit of disagreement with the New Jersey food, even though I'm a local New Jersey person. It could be, depending on the place, pretty bad actually. I found that out yesterday. But anyways, thank you for coming on the podcast. Once again, this has been Mental Medicine Not Prescribed. I am your host, Winston, back from the Voice of the Media. Um, Thank you for watching or listening or whatever you're doing.